So on Monday, we showed you how to modify some hardware resources. And basically what we have is a case where a few of the virtual hardware components are not limited by the resources available on the host. So we showed you on Monday that you can add a separate hard disk controller and then create another hard drive and then attach it and format it after you initialize it and then release it. We used Virtual Media Manager to do this. And today we're going to be talking about networking. So Monday was hardware. Today is networking. And on the following Monday, next week, we'll be doing software and operating systems and applications. So what we wanted to do was basically walk through the special functions of the network options in virtual systems. And if you have your textbook, there's some very handy screenshots and some references. And so I'm going to try to walk through that here just in case that isn't real handy. But the man who authored this book also wrote Networking Made Easy, Get Yourself Connected. And so he explains basics or essentials about networking. We're going to go through that in a minute ourselves. As you work with virtual systems, you have the opportunity to configure more than one network. Even though the host only has one network interface, a virtual machine can have multiple network interfaces. So just like hard disk controllers and hard disks, even though the host system may be limited, in general, if you don't have more than a certain number of cores in your CPU, in general, if you don't have more gigabytes of RAM on your host, in general, if you don't have more than a terabyte of hard disk space, you cannot create virtual machines with hard disks that are larger than a terabyte or have more gigabytes of RAM than the RAM you have on your host, or a greater number of CPU cores than the CPU on your host. But once you get past that initial limitation and you understand the basics about getting virtual machines up and running, you can customize some things very nicely. And virtual machines are ideal for working with networking and connectivity, cybersecurity, public network exposure analysis. You can do a lot of cybersecurity things with a virtual machine. And one of the reasons is that, like the hard disk resources, you can build out additional options. You see here that the default connection for every virtual machine is NAT, or network address translation. And essentially what it's doing is taking the virtual machine and creating its own separate internal network. And you'll notice that the MAC address, that stands for Media Access Control, that's a unique physical identity. Every network interface on the planet is supposed to have it's like a fingerprint. Everybody has a unique address. So your network address can change, but your interface or MAC address identity does not. And so what we wanted to do was to take the time to talk about the different options for network setup in virtual systems. If you click on Advanced and then go into, so when you click on Advanced, you see these extra options here. And explains what promiscuous mode is, and let's walk through this together now. Are there any questions before we start?
No.
Okay. So the whole idea is that you have multiple network adapters, and when you create a virtual machine, the first one is enabled, but adapter 2, 3, and 4 are left sitting there. And in just a minute, we're going to show you what's going on with NAT and how that works on the virtual machine. So you normally get an IP address on your virtual machine, and by default, it's going to use a 10 dot range. So network addresses or internet protocol addresses, IP addresses, come in a variety of flavors. Anytime you see a 10, that's a private internal address. Anytime you see a 192.168, that's a private internal address. Anytime you see a 172.16 or something like that, it's a private internal address. And so it takes your network interface on the host, and then it creates this additional network, and it assigns a local IP address to the virtual machine that's different from your host machine. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a second, and I'm going to show you how we want to look at that while we're here. And stop. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
So when you have a virtual machine, what's really happening is that, okay, it says there's no active ones that are operating, so that's why we can't see it. Basically, inside here, if we go to network, the default is a network address translation, and it's going to emulate a desktop network interface card, even though my host is using a wireless connection. And so it's important to understand that I can change the type of adapter I'm using for my virtual machine, but usually most people don't change that. All right, so I have it set to NAT, and I'm going to go ahead and start this. And I'll start it in detachable mode. I'm sitting on a network address right now. And the easiest way, your book tells you that the easiest way to find out what address you're sitting on is to open a command prompt and type in ipconfig. So on my host, on my wireless LAN adapter, the host is connected to a wireless router, and the wireless router is giving me a 192.168 address. But then the virtual machine creates a second network interface, and it has a .1 address, and that's, can everybody see this right here, the 192.168.1 address?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So right now, if I use a ping command to see what that is, 192.168.1.1, I have an active connection and I can talk with this 1.1 address, and it's called the default gateway. So the way I get out of my wireless connection out onto the internet is through the wireless router, and the wireless router has an address of .1. We go into a lot more detail when you take CSC 243. Do we have anyone here that's in our class now that has not previously taken CSC 243?
I haven't, but I understand networking pretty good.
Okay,
I haven't taken it either.
so was that Victor and Raheem?
Yeah.
Robert,
Robert and Raheem. Okay. Victor, did you have networking?
Um, what's the complete name?
It's a CSC 243, Digital Communications and Networking.
Pretty sure I had it. Don't remember if it's is it taught by you?
It was taught by me. I taught computer architecture in the fall, and I've taught networking in the spring.
Yeah, then I think I most likely had it.
Okay. I know, Aaron, you had networking last season, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. So I'm going to split the difference here. I'm going to explain some concepts, but I'm not going to get into too many weeds, because if you've already had 243, you're going to start rolling your eyes and going, oh, I know what a subnet mask is. I don't want to hear that anymore. So there's a couple of network resources we have to set up, and one of them is this thing called a gateway. If you're going to get out to the outside network, you have to have a gateway. And my host is running on a wireless connection, and it has an address of 115, and the wireless router is sitting on a .1 address right here, and that's the gateway. So when my laptop needs to get out to the internet, it knows to go through the gateway. That's an important idea, because the wireless router is performing network address translation. It's getting a public address from the internet service provider. And if I go to networktools.com, network-tools.com, and I just type that in and I scroll down, this is the public IP address that my internet service provider, another way to do this is to go GRC shields up. So you can go to a couple of different websites, but what happens is that your internet service provider has a public network address. It provides to your wireless router, your service router, and then network address translation converts that into a private internal network address. That's for better security. And in this case, my public network address is 208.84.196.103. That's the address that's publicly used to connect my wireless device from the internet service provider to the internet. But when all the devices in my house connect to that wireless router, they have to get a different, there's a local network, and it's private, and it uses this address range. The important thing to understand is that these numbers have to match if the devices are going to see each other. When you set up VirtualBox, it establishes a gateway address on this adapter. You're going to see this again. We're going to show you this again in just a minute. But I wanted to show you that that's part of the connectivity that allows you to get a virtual machine out on the internet. So I'm just going to minimize this and minimize this. And now I'm going to get into my virtual machine here. And if I do the same thing inside the virtual machine, where I open up a command prompt and I type in ipconfig, it shows that I have a default gateway of 10.0.2.2. So VirtualBox is taking the 56.1 address and it's creating a second network address translation. And it's using 10.0.2.2 as a gateway. And it's giving this address to my virtual machine.
So would that default gateway, would that make it like a virtual router?
Yes, that's a good question. So in a very real sense, it's like a wireless router, a virtual one. And the most important thing is that this address, these addresses don't match. So I can't talk. I can't talk between my virtual machine and the virtual router that's set up by VirtualBox. And I can't talk to the host because they're all on different networks. So if I try to ping 192.168.1.115, I'm not likely to get an answer. I'll try to ping the other gateway first. Oh, and that's going to work because of some other settings that are in place. Let me do this other one, 1.115. So I want to see mostly whether or not my host and my host system and my guest virtual machine can talk. And if I hit enter, it's sitting and thinking. Doesn't look very good. So I can't get anywhere. Now, if I want to stop this, I can press Control C. Oh, wow. So there is some kind of routing going on. In your textbook, it says they're not supposed to be able to talk to each other. So what we're going to do is take a look at some setting changes that'll make sure that's the case. I'm not supposed to be able to ping this. And what's weird is that it took so darn long. So I wonder if there's updates running right now or something like that. So I'm going to connect the textbook again, and we're going to go on with the textbook. Hold on. So by changing the network settings on your virtual system, you can achieve different results. So if you want all of your virtual machines to be able to talk together, oh, come on, I'm supposed to be able to share now. There we go. You have different options within the configuration on your network interface. And if you want all of your if you want your host to be able to talk to other machines on your network, so if you have more than one virtual machine, then what you want is NAT network. So one of the first things we're going to do to demonstrate is I'm going to take my virtual system and I'm going to change the setting, and I'm going to go NAT network. Now, it says there's an invalid setting detected, and that's because there's an extra setting I have to put in place before NAT network is available. But I have a Linux machine and I have a Windows machine, and if I connect the two, they don't necessarily come up on the same. You know what? I'm going to find out if they do. So I want to go ahead and open this up, and I'm guessing you can't see my screen right now. Is that correct?
Oh, we can.
Yeah.
You can see the tablet screen, yes?
It's on that screen, yeah.
But not the other screen.
Nope.
Okay. So let's finish walking through the tablet screen. I want to set up a NAT network so that my Linux virtual machine can talk and be on the same network with my server 2019 machine. And I want my host to be able to create a network so the two virtual machines can talk together. And in order to be able to do that, I have to be able to set up what's called a new NAT network. And so normally if you have NAT, you should not be able to talk between virtual machines, and they should only be able to talk out to the internet and maybe to the host, depending on how the host is set up. And this NAT network, though, is supposed to allow you to set up an internal network where both of your virtual machines can talk together. And in order to do that, you're going to go into VirtualBox Preferences. And so this isn't in the virtual machine, it's in the VirtualBox Preferences. You're going to go to Network, and you're going to access this screen. And if you don't have an adapter, you're going to click the green plus sign and add an adapter and create one that says NAT network. And then it's going to provide the information that's needed to set up that DHCP. So dynamic host control protocol, those are automatic addressing, and it's right here. It's telling you what the network ID is. It's going to be a 10.0.2.0 address, and it's going to support DHCP. And after you configure this, then you're supposed to be able to go into the adapter setting and change it to NAT network. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And well, let's look at a couple more things here while we've got this on the screen. So you also have other options, one called internal network. So if it's an internal network, then the VMs can talk to each other, but they can't talk to the host or other outside networks. Can everybody see that? So if you want a network that won't talk to the host, don't use NAT, don't use NAT network, use internal network. And that means that you can only talk between virtual machines. And then if you want a host-only network, this is similar to the internal network option, but also allows you to communicate with the VirtualBox host. So if you want the VirtualBox host, then you have to set this up, and it says you have to also use a host-only adapter configured for this option. Usually when you set up your first virtual machines, VirtualBox sets up the host-only adapter for you. And then generic driver says you can share network interfaces between your VMs, and it's used more for development advanced. We're not gonna mess with that. So one of the things we want to do is we want to start up our Linux virtual machine, see if it can talk to the other virtual machine, and then try one of these other options like internal network or NAT network. And we also want to change the DHCP. So one of the reasons we're reviewing this is you have the ability to change it so that you can define what your internal network is going to be. It doesn't have to be 10.0.2. So you could assign IP addresses, and you could specify the address range that you're being used. You just have to take the extra steps to set up the other types of networks. So, all right, let me stop sharing this now. Let me get on the other screen. Oftentimes you can't make changes while the machine's running. You have to shut the machine down. So that's the other caveat you have to remember, is that if you're trying to change network types, then in some cases it doesn't work because you have to have the systems powered off in order to set up the other options. First thing I'm going to do is turn on my Linux machine and see what kind of IP address it gets. And I want to see if it can talk to my server machine and to the host using just the NAT. And it could be that the virtual adapter was automatically set up by VirtualBox when I installed this latest version, and that the default network setting is internal network because I can ping the network, and I can connect to the other machine even though it's supposed to be isolated. So I now have two virtual machines running, and this one is sitting on I'm not sure why this is terribly slow. Okay. So this is sitting on 10.0.2.15, and the default gateway is 10.2.2. On my Linux machine, I want to be able to define cases where the two machines can talk together, or I can set them up in isolation with each other, where they don't talk to the host, but they can talk to each other, or a three-way where they can talk to the host. So I think because I'm recording and sharing and doing all of this, I'm running into some, I've got the internet going, I'm running into some resource issues, and that's why it's so slow. Let's see if closing a few things can help. Okay, so if I bring up a terminal window, and then I go ahead and type in ifconfig, that'll give me details about what my network is doing on the Linux machine. And this is my host right here. So here we see my address is 10.0.2. 0.2.15. And where's my gateway address? I have my broadcast here. It's 2.255. It's a /24 address. Oh, it's also using IPv6. So my other machine is also using 2.15. What's the problem with this picture here? Does anyone know what's going on here? Okay. Let's try two. Let's try two. So if you had a networking class with me, are you supposed to have two machines with the same IP address on the same network?
No.
No, you're not. That's bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one of the things we want to do is we want these two to be able to talk to each other, and we know that these are two separate networks because there's no way this could work. If I started pinging 10.2.2 on this machine and I started doing the same thing with this, I'd get some strange interactions. Let me see if I can do an ipconfig release and then a renew. I want to see if I get a different address now that I have a Linux machine. Nope, I still have the same address. So I have a 10.0.2.15 on the default gateway. So what we're seeing is that these two machines have the same address. The virtual adapter is working the same way for both of them, and there's no way for me to be able to get different. They can't talk to each other.
And it's using DHCP, or is it static?
It's using DHCP, and it's configuring each virtual machine in a similar manner. And that's one reason why we need to differentiate. That's why we need to try the different network options. So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the VirtualBox preferences. And I'll go to network. And you'll notice I do not have a NAT network card set up. Does everybody see that? So I don't have a NAT network card set up. So when I try to use the other option for NAT network on my machines, I can't use it. It says it's an incompatible setting. If I go into here, I don't want two separate internal networks with two machines on the same IP address. That's just weird. When I try to use NAT network, I get this invalid settings detected. The trick is to go ahead and go to preferences and set up that network card, NAT network. I'm going to say okay. And actually, I'm going to go inside here and look at properties. I think this is, that it's the selected. All right, does everybody see 10.0.2.0?
Yeah.
Right, so I'm gonna change this and I'm gonna say 3.0. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I've just set up this extra card, and now what I want to do is go to my virtual machines, and I want to try that other option so I can set up NAT network instead of NAT. Now it allows me to have NAT network. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the rest of the settings the way it is. So I didn't get an error this time. So now if I go ahead and see what I have, oh, it's saying I'm on a new network. By the way, if you ever get prompted with this, what answer do you always want to use?
Nope.
Yeah, in general, you always want to say no. So let's see what my address is. Oh, hey, I have a 3. I have a 3.4. So that change I just made, I created the NAT network adapter. And now I have a NAT network option. And I changed it to 10.0.3. And it's using 3.1 as a gateway address. Let's see what happens when we go on the other machine now. I want to go to the other one. I just tried changing to NAT network previously. It wouldn't let me. It said it was incompatible because I didn't have the adapter set up yet. Now I have the adapter set up. It's allowing me to do this. I'm going to say okay. Let's see if my address changed. Oh, now I'm sitting on 10.0.3.5. What was my other address?
3.4.
3.4. I'm not sitting on the same IP address as the other virtual machine, sitting on 2 separate private internal addresses. Now I'm sitting inside here. Now the host machine is sitting on 192.168. Something or other. And I want to see what I can ping from here. So I'm going to try to ping the Linux machine on .5 from here and vice versa. So I'm going to say ping 10 dot, whoops, .0.3.5. Oh, I can see that. I'm going to get on this machine, which is sitting on .5, and see if I can ping .4. I can ping the other machine. Let's see if I can ping the gateway. It allows me to ping the gateway. Let me see if I can ping the host machine. The host machine is sitting on 192.168.1.115. And there's this separate virtual interface that VirtualBox set up called 192.168.56.1. I'm going to try both of those. I'll try doing this one first, the 56.1, and then I'll try the 1.115. Well, it's letting me hit the internal VirtualBox adapter. Let me see if I can do the same thing from the server. Yep, lets me hit that. Now let me see if I can talk to the host machine. Yep, lets me talk to the host machine. So not everything is going to work as advertised depending on the network card and how it's set up, but let's see if we can configure this so that only the virtual machines can talk to each other, but they can't talk to the host. And that's probably the internal adapter, right? Yep. So the two virtual machines can talk to each other, and they can talk to the virtual interface, the network interface that VirtualBox set up on 56.1, and they can talk to the host. So now what I'm going to do is change the machine settings to internal network. And internal network. Whoop. Sorry. So let's see if our IP address changed. Nope, IP address didn't change. Let's see if our IP address changed. Yeah, now I don't have an IP address, I don't think. So that's kind of interesting. Let's verify the setting on this. Cable's connected. Okay, I can't talk to the host. I can't talk to the host. Let's see if I can talk to the virtual adapter. I can't talk to the virtual adapter. Can't talk to the virtual adapter. Yeah, I don't even have a network address. I'm going to go ahead and try to restart my system and just see if that'll give me a network address. But it says you're disconnected, you're offline, it's an internal only address. So let's see if so the server took the internal address and it looked like it kept the same address. I'm going to see if I can do a release renew. Oh, so now we're seeing the same problem with the server. So if I go to an internal only network, what's happening now is that the DHCP isn't set up. And the reason it could ping before is because the IP address was still in place. So we have this thing called a release time. And in simple terms, you can change the time that network addresses are good for. So the lease time says normally on a Windows machine, an IP address is good for 8 days. And if you don't clear it out with a renew or a release renew, then you don't get a decent result. And it keeps the old address, and then when you make network changes, you can't really troubleshoot. So I'm going to go ahead here and restart each of these systems because I want to see if a restart will give them a new address. And I want to check one thing on my textbook to see if there's something else that needs to be configured for internal network. So while that's shutting down, let me get to this. Now this is turned out to be unresponsive. It says it's unable to connect to the DHCP server, so I can't even. I changed the settings to internal network, and now it's not giving me anything here. So I'm going to go ahead and power this off. And I'm going to power the other one off. This is in the process of shutting down right now. So while those two are powering down, I'm going to go ahead and look to see whether or not there's additional settings that need to be set up for the internal network. It says internal network. This mode allows any VM that are configured in this mode to communicate with each other, but they cannot communicate with the VirtualBox host or any networks connected to that host. So once both of these machines come back up, they should be able to see each other and talk to each other, but nothing else. Host-only network. This is similar to internal network, but also communication with the VirtualBox host. So we could go host-only network, and it says you need to have a host-only adapter configured to use this option. This adapter type will be covered in the host network manager session later in the chapter. So let's try host-only network, and then let's look at the DHCP options once we have our virtual machines sit down. So that's going to take a while here. Are there any questions at this point?
None yet.
Okay, can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I want a NAT network, then I go to Preferences and I select Network, and I set up a NAT network adapter. If I want an internal network or a host-only network, I go into the Host Network Manager, and here's a host-only network adapter. Does everybody see 56.1?
Yeah.
Does everybody see the checkbox for DHCP server?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So you probably wondered, where am I getting the 56.1 for? The host network manager set up a VirtualBox host-only Ethernet adapter in case you wanted a private internal network address or host-only network. And the DHCP server, the server address is 100, and the lower address it's going to issue is 101, and the upper one, it's going to increase all the way up to 254. So it's going to enable the DHCP server, and it says this adapter is configured manually. So it looks like that's ready to go. And I should be able, at this point, if I look at this, I should be able to change my settings to host only now. And can everybody see VirtualBox host only network adapter?
Yeah.
Okay. Then it says, you currently have unsaved settings. Would you like to reload the change settings to keep your own changes? We're going to keep the changes. I'll do the same on the other one. I'm going to change it to host only. If I click OK, I just want to check this one again to make sure it's right. Yep. So the host only adapter is going to use the VirtualBox Ethernet adapter with the DHCP settings to create the internal network so that both of these machines can talk together. And what we should see is a case where we get 56.100 and 56.101 when we start these up. That's what we should get. So let's see what happens. Again, depending on the host, the network interface, physical network interface adapters you have, the internet service provider you have on the back end, sometimes you have to try different options to achieve the results you want. What do you have to know for the assessment for the last module? Well, what's in your book in chapter 6? If it says that NAT network allows the virtual machines to talk with each other, but not to the host, that's what I expect you to know for the test, whether it works that way on your machine or not, whether we're able to demonstrate it on this machine or not. If it says hosts network, and and it asks what additional requirements do you have to have, then you'd say, well, you have to have a virtual adapter that's set up. And in some cases, you have to set it up manually or not. Just like the NAT network, sometimes you have to set it up manually. The important thing is to understand the effect of each of these options so you define the network instead of rolling the dice. You want to define the network that you're going to have for your virtual machines in very specific terms, depending on what you're going to use it for. And especially if you're going to use it for cybersecurity, you're going to want to define what type of network address it's getting, whether or not there's NAT, whether or not it's a bridged adapter, all of that. So in just a minute, we'll know whether or not it works. We should see a different IP address on here. So if I have NAT network, I get two different IP addresses and they can talk to each other and the host. Aha! I get a 56 address. That's encouraging. It could be that the 101 is the Linux machine. The Linux machine is 101, 56.101. What did we say was the gateway? Does anyone remember?
Was it the 192 point? Yeah, that.
56.1. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that works. Okay, let me see if we can do 102. Oh, it sees 102. Let me see if it can ping Google. Let me see if it can ping Google with an address. Nope. So a host-only network is going to allow me to communicate between the host network adapter and not to the internet, but between the two virtual machines. So if I have this one, let's see if we have the same thing. I want to ping 101, 192.168.56.101. And yes. Does everybody see the gateway?
No, we don't.
Is there a gateway address defined?
No.
Nope.
No. That's why you can't get out on the internet. But you can talk to the other machine. So what's important to understand is that each of these network options, you have to have a gateway to get out. And if you're going to use DNS, if you're going to use domain names, like if you want to ping Google or you want to search google.com, then you have to have a DNS entry. And you can specify these things in your systems. So I can manually specify a gateway and maybe I can get out then, right? So let's see if I can ping Google. Doesn't look good, does it? How about ping 8.8.8.8? Nope. So what would happen if I put in a gateway address manually so I could go out? Let's find out. This says I'm going to get an IP address automatically. Let's pretend that I want to set my own and I want to keep what I already have. What do I already have? 102, 56.102. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
So I'm going to use this. I'm going to go 192.168.56.102. So I want to use the same one. Instead of automatically assigning it from the host machine, I'm going to do this. I'll put 192.168.56.1. I'm not going to put in a DNS address because I want to know whether adding a gateway is going to give me what I need to go out. So now I'm going to try to, it says, I'm going to answer no. I'm going to see if I can ping 8.8.8.8. Nope. So putting a gateway in there doesn't help. So a host-only network means your network lives.
Can you ping the gateway?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question. Yes, I can ping the gateway, but I can't go out. I wonder if I like put a DNS in there, would that make a difference? Probably not. But let's see what happens. I'll put in 1.1.1.1. And I wonder who's sitting on 100. Is my host sitting on 100? No. It's using 56.1. That's the gateway address. And the wireless connection is using 168.1.115. So it's not using 100. But let me see if that helps with the external access. I don't think it will. Let me see if I can ping 192.168. 192.168.1.115. But I can't talk to the wireless host adapter. I can't talk to the outside world. I can only connect between the virtual machines. So host only adapter is a good way to isolate a network for virtual machines that need to talk to each other that don't need to talk to anybody else. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and test the rest of these options, and I may create a video for you to watch. I'll have a short assignment for you to try some things on your own system. Are there any questions about the network options we've configured at this point?
No.
No.
I'm going to go ahead and set my properties back to automatic so that I don't have a problem getting back when I make the other changes. Okay? Okay, that's all we were going to cover today. We just wanted to try on some of the new network options to see if we could get virtual machines talking together in a safe internal private network where they couldn't mess with anything else. And it looks like the host only adapter is the best way to go for the purposes of my own host. Your mileage may vary. Try the different options out. NAT network, host only, internal, and see how they differ. All right, that's it for today.